The call came while I was grading essays, red penning yet another uninspired take on linguistic drift in dead languages. My phone buzzed against the corner of my desk, its vibrations skittering across stacks of overdue papers. The number was unlisted. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to pick up. I hated unlisted numbers. Nothing good ever came from them. Still, something pulled me to answer, the same instinct that kept me poring over ancient texts long after the academic world deemed them irrelevant. "Dr. Locke," I said, not bothering to mask the irritation in my tone. "Jonathan." The voice on the other end was deep and gravelly, familiar but distant, like a faded memory. "It's Martin. We need you." I froze. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't respond. The voice belonged to Martin Morley, my former colleague from the Gate 42 project. We hadn't spoken in years. The project had been shut down, decommissioned, buried, and forgotten. Or so I thought. "You've got the wrong number," I said flatly, reaching to end the call. "Don't hang up," Martin said, his voice suddenly sharp. "This isn't a social call, Jonathan. The gate, it's active." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. I almost laughed, but the way Martin said it, with a tightness that hinted at equal parts fear and urgency, made the sound die in my throat. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Active?" I said, keeping my voice low as if someone might overhear. "What the hell are you talking about?" "It came back online 3 days ago. We need you at the site. No one else can read the transmissions." Transmissions. My mind raced. The gate had been dormant, lifeless when we left it. A relic buried deep beneath the Nevada desert. A gateway to nowhere, or so we thought. But it wasn't human-made, that much we knew. Its surface was smooth, a ring of some alien alloy etched with symbols we couldn't translate. It was supposed to be dead, inert, a failed anomaly relegated to the dustbin of black projects. "Martin, I haven't been in the field for years, you know that," I said, trying to deflect. "And the gate? Just get to the site, Jonathan. This isn't optional. You'll be briefed when you arrive." His tone left no room for argument. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Then, with a resigned sigh, I began packing a bag. The drive out to the Nevada desert felt both familiar and surreal. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a strip of asphalt cutting through a barren, sun-scorched landscape. It had been over a decade since I last made this trip. The silence of the desert was overwhelming, pierced only by the occasional rattle of my car as the wind gusted across the empty plains. Memories of my time on the Gate 42 project came rushing back. Late nights in the lab, the noise of experimental equipment, the sharp scent of the portal itself. When I arrived at the facility, the site was almost unrecognizable. The main gate was still intact, but the guard post was abandoned, its windows coated in layers of sand. Beyond it, the once bustling compound was a ghost town. Buildings that once housed cutting-edge labs were now crumbling under the weight of years of neglect. 2 black SUVs were parked near the entrance to the main building, their glossy paint jobs out of place among the ruins. Men in tactical gear loitered nearby, their presence a reminder that this was no ordinary academic excursion. As I pulled up, one of them approached my car, gesturing for me to stop. He tapped on my window, and I rolled it down reluctantly. "Dr. Jonathan Locke?" he asked, his tone brusque. I nodded. He stepped back and motioned for me to follow him. No introductions, no pleasantries. Just a silent escort into the belly of the beast. Inside, the facility was a strange mix of the familiar and the alien. The main control room, once the nerve center of our operations, was still intact, though much of the equipment looked newer, more advanced. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying streams of data interspersed with series of symbols, the same alien script I had spent years studying. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. "Jonathan!" Martin's voice snapped me out of my trance. He stood on the far side of the room, looking older and wearier than I remembered. His hair was thinner, his frame more gaunt. but his eyes still had that same intensity. "Martin," I said with relief and apprehension. "What's going on?" He gestured for me to follow him. "You need to see it for yourself." We walked in silence, passing through a series of security checkpoints before descending into the lower levels of the facility. Finally, we reached the chamber that housed Gate 42. The sight took my breath away. The portal stood at the center of the room, just as I remembered it. An enormous, ring-shaped construct, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. Symbols cascaded across its surface in a rhythmic pattern, shifting and morphing. The air around it felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. "It started 3 days ago," Martin said. "We don't know why. All we know is that it's transmitting." "Transmitting what?" I asked, approaching the portal. The symbols were almost familiar, like a half-remembered dream. My mind raced to piece them together, but they slipped through my thoughts like water through my fingers. Martin handed me a tablet, its screen displaying a series of decoded fragments. "This is what we've managed to translate so far," he said. "It's incomplete." I scanned the text, my pulse quickening with each word. "They are returning. Prepare the way." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's returning?" Martin shook his head. "We were hoping you could tell us." I looked back at the portal, its surface shifting in mesmerizing patterns. I took a step closer, drawn by an inexplicable pull. My heart pounded as I reached out a hand, stopping just short of the portal's surface. The glow intensified, and the symbols aligned into a coherent message, one that burned itself into my mind. "Jonathan." I took a step back. "It knows my name," I whispered. Martin looked at me with confusion and concern. "What are you talking about?" I shook my head. "The portal, it just said my name." "That's impossible," Martin said, but the look in his eyes betrayed his doubt. I turned back to the portal, its glow now dimming, the symbols returning to their chaotic state. My mind raced with questions, each more troubling than the last. Why had the gate reactivated after all these years? What did it mean by "they are returning"? And why did it seem to know me? I didn't have answers. But one thing was clear. This was no accident. The gate had awakened for a reason, and I was at the center of it. The days merged in the subterranean halls of the facility. Without windows, without natural light, time lost its meaning. The portal's glow had become the centerpiece of my existence, its shifting symbols filling my mind even when I tried to sleep. I had taken over a corner of the control room, setting up my workstation with monitors, notebooks, and reference materials I hadn't touched in years. Data streamed from the portal, spilling onto my screens in cascading patterns. Every now and then, fragments of the alien language would coalesce into something coherent, though just barely. The words came in bursts, half-formed sentences like incomplete thoughts. "They approach. Prepare the way. Jonathan." The last one haunted me the most. Every time it appeared, I felt a visceral jolt, as if the portal were reaching across some unfathomable gulf to touch me directly. "Are you getting anywhere?" Martin's voice broke through my thoughts, startling me. He stood behind me holding a mug of what I assumed was coffee, though its bitter tang suggested it might have been brewed days ago. "Somewhere, but not fast enough," I replied, rubbing my temples. "The structure of the language, it's almost like it's adapting as I work on it. Every time I think I've pinned something down, it shifts." Martin nodded. "We've been monitoring it. The symbols are becoming more complex, but they're also starting to repeat patterns. It's like it's learning." I glanced at him sharply. "Learning what?" He shrugged, clearly unsettled by the thought. "That's what we were hoping you'd figure out." After Martin left, I turned back to the screens. The portal wasn't just transmitting, it was evolving. Each interaction seemed to deepen its complexity, as if it were responding to my attempts to understand it. I'd always been fascinated by the concept of alien intelligence. But this was something else entirely. The first real breakthrough came late that night. I was reviewing a particularly dense sequence of symbols when a pattern emerged. It was a cipher, simple but elegant, like the foundational building blocks of a language. My pulse quickened as I worked through it, rearranging the symbols, breaking them down into smaller components until a coherent phrase emerged. The Creator returns. The words sent a shiver down my spine. They felt definitive, almost ominous. But the strangest part wasn't the message. It was the way the portal seemed to react to my discovery. The glow of its surface intensified, and the symbols shifted into a perfect symmetry, like the ripples of a pond suddenly freezing in place. And then it changed. The symbols reappeared, cascading across its surface in a torrent of motion. It was like a response, as if it knew I'd understood. The next day, things started to get stranger. It began with a sound, a low musical hum that seemed to emanate from the portal itself. At first, I thought it was just another quirk of the facility's aging infrastructure, but the tone was too precise. It wasn't random noise. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The contractors stationed at the facility began reporting headaches, vivid dreams, and an unshakable sense of unease. The portal's behavior became more erratic. Its symbols became more intricate, spiraling into fractal-like formations. I struggled to keep up, my notes filling with half-deciphered fragments and wild theories. But the messages were becoming clearer, their warnings more direct. Prepare for the renewal. This world is incomplete. Jonathan. Every time my name appeared, it felt like a challenge. Why me? Why now? The portal's transmissions had become an obsession, consuming every waking moment. Even when I tried to rest, the symbols haunted my dreams, shifting and writhing in the darkness. One night, as I reviewed another sequence of transmissions, the portal's vibration became more intense. I stood, my pulse racing, as the symbols on its surface shifted into a new pattern. This time, there was no doubt. It wasn't just transmitting, it was speaking. Jonathan, come closer. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The message wasn't abstract or cryptic, it was direct. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to appear and tell me I was imagining things, but I was alone. Cautiously, I approached the portal. The air around it felt different, charged with an almost tangible energy. As I reached the edge of the platform, the symbols on its surface aligned, forming a coherent pattern. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Why me? I asked. The portal's glow intensified, and I felt something brush against my thoughts. It was vast and unfathomable, like staring into the depths of an ocean. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Whatever the portal was, it was alive and it was trying to reach me. But why? What did it want? And what did it mean by renewal? The next morning, I confronted Martin. The portal's alive, I said, my voice trembling with fear and frustration. It's aware. It's communicating. He stared at me for a long moment. We suspected as much, he said finally. But we needed you to confirm it. I slammed my notebook down on the table. You knew, and you didn't tell me. It wasn't a certainty, Martin replied, his tone calm but defensive. We've been monitoring its behavior, but we didn't have enough evidence. Until now. I shook my head, struggling to process his words. This isn't just some anomaly, Martin. It's intelligent, it's evolving, and it's focused on me. Why you? He asked, his voice softening. That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. But whatever this is, it's not random, it knows me. It's calling to me. Martin leaned forward, his expression serious. Then you'd better find out why. Because if we don't figure this out soon, we're going to lose control. The words lingered in my mind as I returned to my workstation. The portal's presence was getting stronger, its influence spreading like a ripple through the facility. Whatever was coming, I had the sinking feeling we were already too late to stop it. The transmissions poured in, spilling across my screens faster than I could process them. The language was no longer abstract. It had become precise, direct, almost conversational, and the messages were increasingly clear. The Creator will arrive. Earth is incomplete. Prepare for renewal. I pored over the data, searching for context, for clarity. If the portal was warning us, then it must believe we had a role to play. But what kind of role? The portal's focus on me only deepened my unease. Why had it singled me out? What connection did I have to its so-called creator? The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. I was running yet another analysis of the latest transmission when the symbols froze in place, forming a complex pattern. My computer screen flashed, and then a new phrase appeared. The creator approaches, speak now. The message wasn't cryptic. It was a directive. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, unsure if I even should. But then, almost involuntarily, I spoke aloud. What do you want from me? My voice sounded small against the portal's overwhelming presence. The portal's glow intensified, and I felt something ripple through the air. A strange, almost tangible shift, like an electrical charge brushing against my skin. The symbols on its surface changed, aligning themselves into a pattern I had seen hints of before, but could never fully piece together. As they stabilized, the message that appeared wasn't abstract or encoded. It was plain, direct. Earth is the vessel. The creator will restore balance. The words hit like a hammer. Earth as a vessel, balance restored. These weren't warnings, they were declarations. I didn't understand all the implications, but the weight of the message was impossible to ignore. Whatever was coming, the portal was making no attempt to soften the blow. I scribbled the translation into my notebook, my handwriting unsteady. My thoughts churned, trying to process the enormity of what the portal was telling us. The portal wasn't just broadcasting, it was communicating. Not just passively transmitting, but actively seeking to explain, even if the full meaning was beyond me. Later that day, Martin convened a meeting in the control room. Everyone gathered, contractors, technicians, analysts, all visibly on edge. We've confirmed the latest transmissions, Martin began, addressing the group. The portal has been consistent in its messaging. The creator is coming. What does that mean, exactly? One of the contractors asked, his voice filled with both skepticism and fear. Is this thing some kind of alien invader? Martin hesitated, his eyes briefly meeting mine before he answered. It's not that simple. Based on Dr. Locke's translations, the creator isn't coming to invade, it's coming to repair. Repair what? Another voice chimed in. The portal? Earth, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. The transmissions refer to Earth as a vessel, something incomplete. Whatever the creator is, it's coming to restore balance. That doesn't sound like an invasion. It sounds like a process, a mechanical, inevitable process. The implications hung in the air like a guillotine blade. No one spoke for a long moment. So, what happens to us? The first contractor asked, breaking the silence. We don't know yet, Martin said, his voice quieter now. But it's clear the creator's renewal won't leave Earth in a state we'd recognize, or survive. A tense debate followed, voices rising as fear and frustration spilled over. Some argued for immediate action, detonating the portal to cut off any connection to the creator. Others, including me, warned against it. Destroying the portal might trigger an energy release we couldn't predict, and even if it worked, it wouldn't stop the creator from arriving. In the end, Martin took control. For now, we focus on gathering as much information as possible. Any decision we make has to be based on more than fear. That night, I stayed in the observation chamber, staring at the portal. I was exhausted, but the idea of leaving it unwatched felt wrong, as if something critical might happen the moment I turned away. The portal's transmissions had become almost constant now, spilling across the screens in cascading waves of symbols. I worked through them as best I could, translating fragments here and there, but the pace was overwhelming. It was as if the portal were building towards something, a crescendo that I couldn't yet see. And then, without warning, the symbols froze. The portal's glow dimmed and the room was eerily still. My pulse quickened as the symbols rearranged themselves, forming a new message. Prepare for the Creator, the renewal is near. Prepare for what? What did renewal even mean in practical terms? My frustration boiled over, and before I could stop myself, I spoke aloud. What do you want us to do? The portal's surface shimmered, and I felt a pressure at the edge of my thoughts, like a question that hadn't been asked yet. Then the symbols shifted again, and a new message appeared. You are the intermediary. The Creator speaks through the vessel. I stared at the words, my mind racing. This wasn't about me. The portal wasn't singling me out. It was using me. I was just the translator, the first human to have worked on the gate, and the one who had the tools to understand its language. My role wasn't to decide anything. It was to communicate. The responsibility didn't rest on my shoulders, but it still felt crushing. I typed the translation into the system, forwarding it to Martin and the others. The portal's activity reached a fever pitch. Its glow was brighter now, almost blinding. The transmissions became faster, more urgent, the symbols cascading in endless streams that I could barely keep up with. I worked tirelessly, translating what I could, but the messages were becoming more abstract, more conceptual. It was as if the portal was trying to convey something that couldn't be put into words. The translations became harder to pass as the portal's activity became more frenzied. The symbols poured across my screen, looping and folding in on themselves like fractals, increasingly abstract. The gate wasn't just transmitting data anymore, it was pouring its very essence into the messages, desperate to make us understand. Late one night, I finally pieced together a chilling revelation. The words coalesced into meaning, though not in the tidy sentences I had grown accustomed to. The concepts were larger, tangled with ideas humanity had no language for. But I understood enough. Earth wasn't natural. It wasn't a random accumulation of stardust, forged through cosmic accidents over billions of years. It had been crafted, meticulously shaped, and left as part of some vast, incomprehensible project. The Creator was not merely the architect of the gate, it was the architect of Earth itself. I sat back, staring at the words on the screen. Designed habitat had been the term closest to what I could translate. The planet was a controlled system, an experiment perhaps. A node in some larger cosmic design, just like the portal. And then I saw the final fragment of the message, one that turned my stomach cold. Deviation detected. Humanity is the anomaly. Humanity wasn't part of the plan. Our existence wasn't intended. Life on Earth may have been, but not us. We were a consequence of the Creator's kind abandoning the planet, leaving it to evolve beyond their control. What I had first interpreted as the Creator's intention to destroy was, in truth, something far more clinical. The Creator was coming to fix its creation. When I relayed the translation to Martin and the others, the reaction was predictable. Fear gave way to anger, then panic. One of the contractors slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising above the din. So what are we supposed to do? Just wait for this thing to come here and wipe us out? Martin, his face lined with stress, raised a hand for silence. We can't fight something we don't understand, he said, but we can limit its options. The portal is the only direct link we know of. If we sever that connection, we might buy ourselves time. What are you suggesting? I asked. We bury it, Martin replied, his tone cold and decisive. Encase the gate in something it can't penetrate, seal it off and make it unreachable. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. As the days passed, the facility erupted with activity. Engineers began constructing a massive containment site around the gate chamber. Reinforced concrete, lead shielding, and specialized materials designed to resist even the strongest energy emissions were brought in. They called it a tomb, and that's exactly what it felt like. I spent those days shuttling between my workstation and the observation chamber, monitoring the portal's activity as the preparations progressed. The gate's messages had become almost desperate, as if it understood what we were doing. Symbols flashed across its surface, fragments of warnings and threats. Interruption unacceptable. The Creator arrives regardless. You cannot escape correction. It was the last message that chilled me the most. We were trying to hide, to sever our connection, But the gate seemed to know what we didn't want to admit, that this wasn't about the portal. The Creator's return was inevitable, whether through the gate or some other means. On the final day, I stood in the observation chamber watching as the contractors worked. They were filling the cavern with layer upon layer of concrete, burying the portal beneath a tomb that would, in theory, make it unreachable. The once bright glow of the gate was now muted, visible only through small openings in the scaffolding. Martin stood beside me, his arms crossed, his face grim. "Do you think this will work?" he asked. "I think it'll stop the gate from functioning. But it won't stop the Creator. If it's coming, it'll find another way." Martin didn't respond. He just nodded, his jaw tight. I could see the weight of the decision in his eyes. He wasn't a man prone to showing emotion, but in that moment, he looked every bit as uncertain as I felt. As the final layer of concrete was poured, the gate emitted one last surge of activity. The symbols on its surface flared brighter than ever, their patterns spinning into a dizzying vortex. For a moment, it looked almost alive, as if straining against the walls of its new prison. Then, with a sudden crack, the glow dimmed. The gate fell silent. Slowly, Martin approached, peering at the gate through the gaps in the concrete. "Is it off?" someone whispered. "I think so," Martin replied. The silence wasn't reassuring. It was ominous, like the stillness before a storm. The facility emptied out over the next day. The tomb was sealed, the observation chamber abandoned, and the control room powered down. I packed my belongings in silence, my mind still reeling from everything we had learned. The Creator was still out there, somewhere in the void. How far away? How long would it take to reach Earth without the gate? Years, centuries, millennia. There was no way to know. As I left the facility for the last time, I glanced back at the barren landscape. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the tomb hidden beneath layers of sand and stone. For all our efforts, for all the precautions we had taken, an unsettling feeling remained that it wasn't enough. We hadn't stopped anything. We had only delayed the inevitable. The Creator was out there, moving through the cosmos with a purpose we couldn't hope to understand. Would it arrive in my lifetime? Or would it take so long that humanity would forget it ever existed? Somewhere out there, in the vastness of the universe, something was coming, and we had no idea how long we had left.